This is Packet 1 of the 2018 National All-Star Academic Tournament. Tossups. Tossup 1. A character in this play tells another character that he represents the shells of the eggs that he is beating and complains about the dearth of good French comedies. A character in this play insists that a small mahogany table is found to replicate the room of a woman who is accused of using robe et manteau to lure good girls into her atelier. At the end of this play, a boy commits suicide with a revolver while his sibling drowns in a fountain, prompting a confused man to muse that he has wasted a day regardless. At the start of this play, the director of a version of The Rules of the Game is interrupted by characters including the father and the mother. For 10 points, name this play in which several characters struggle to piece together their story, which is by Luigi Pirandello. That answer is 6 characters in search of an author. Toss-up 2. South African philosopher Grant Farid wrote that this thinker surprisingly resonated with his struggle against racism in his book on how this man saved my life. This man contended that theology is a positive science about faith worlds, whereas philosophy is critical. A late lecture by this thinker originated the dictum, "Language speaks," and he wrote an essay that examines Van Gogh's Peasant Shoes. This thinker's magnum opus begins with a discourse on the forgetting of being in Western thought. For 10 points, name this philosopher who wrote The Origin of the Work of Art and Being and Time, a Nazi who was revealed to be an unapologetic anti-Semite in his black notebooks. That is Martin Heidegger. Toss-up 3. Suppliers of this good can take advantage of the Ellis Act, which circumvents some restrictions on removing this good. This good was the subject of Proposition F and Proposition I, also known as the Mission Moratorium, 2 failed ballot propositions that regulated the provision of this good. A plan to provide this good in Mountain View was forbidden by the City Council in order to protect burrowing owls. Restrictions on the supply of this good include sunset laws that regulate the casting of shadows and a 40-foot maximum height law that was partially modified by Proposition D in 2015. Approximately 60,000 people per year leave the San Francisco area due to the high cost of this good. For 10 points, name this good whose namesake crisis is causing high rents throughout California. That answer is housing. Toss-up 4. The flux of this compound into the atmosphere is described by the Penman-Monteith equation, which is modified by the Priestley-Taylor equation to be a function of only solar irradiance. The relationship between the partial pressure of this compound and temperature is described by the psychrometric constant. The phreatic zone has high levels of this compound, whose movement in the vadose zone is described by the Richards equation, which modifies Darcy's law. It's not carbon dioxide, but this compound is the most abundant greenhouse gas. Saturation excess and infiltration excess can result in overland runoff of this compound, which enters the atmosphere through evapotranspiration. For 10 points, name this compound that is deposited as rain. That answer is water, or H2O. Toss-up 5. Until 1819, many of these places used Thomas Eddy's practice of awarding people a small sum of money called the overstint. A revolutionary one of these places in Philadelphia, opened in 1829, used the separate system of operation and had a single glass skylight that represented the eye of God. The Auburn system of organizing these places emphasized complete silence and forced people to walk in lockstep without looking at each other, while the Pennsylvania system encouraged solitary living among occupants. In antebellum America, these places increasingly began to be known by a form of the word penitent. For 10 points, name these locations, which include New York's Sing Sing. That answer is prisons. Toss-up 6. After first having a career as a poet in France, an artist who worked in this country put sand in her paint and used the sgraffito technique to create hazy depictions of l'église and the inner city. That artist was Elise Rahon. An artist who worked in this country painted Ulu's Pants, The Meal of Lord Candlestick, and a portrait of her one-time lover, Max Ernst, and fled to this country after a breakdown that she narrated in her novel Down Below. Those artists, Remedios Varo and Leonora Carrington, began a relationship while living in its capital. An artist born in this country created the self-portraits What the Water Gave Me and one with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird for 10 points. Named this country of many expatriate surrealist painters, which is where Frida Kahlo was born. That answer is Mexico. Tossup 7. This language was spoken by the powerful medieval merchant guild known as the Ainu Ravar. Speakers of this language ruled a dynasty that used Kalandia ships and constructed social classes based on who had to pay a land tax called Irai Kudigal. A king of a dynasty that spoke this language commissioned the Brihadisvara temple and won the Kandalur War. This language was spoken by the dynasty of Rajaraja I. The Chera, Pandya, and Chola dynasties were ruled by speakers of this language. Some of its speakers participated in a later organization founded by Velupillai Prabhakaran that assassinated Rajiv Gandhi for 10 points. Named this South Indian language spoken by an anti-Sinhalese terrorist group in Sri Lanka, its namesake, Tigers. That answer is Tamil. Tossup 8. An altar to Apollo is set up to protect this object at the tomb of Sthenelus. While in Syrtis, 3 nymphs tell a hero to carry this thing until they reach the garden of the Hesperides. Athena and Hera discuss strategy while this object is hidden in the Phasis, and this thing is chased by a spiritus to the Phrygian islands. Diodorus described how this thing was created on Mount Pelion. This was the only object to successfully pass through the Planctae. Ovid says that part of this object was able to speak because it was taken from the wood of the shrine at Dodona. In a poem by Gaius Valerius Flaccus, it is said that there was nobody to look out for lights along the coastline before this thing was created. This craft's most famous journey was from Iolcos to Colchis. For 10 points, name this ship that carried Jason and his companions on the quest for the Golden Fleece. That answer is the Argo. Tossup 9. A medication that blocks movement of this ion is used to prevent a vasospasm after subarachnoid hemorrhage. High levels of this ion can cause the appearance of a J-wave on an ECG, which is normally associated with hypothermia. A class of medications that block the movement of this ion are divided into dihydropyridine and non-dihydropyridine types, and includes both amlodipine and nifedipine. Those drugs block movement of this ion through L, T, or P/Q type channels. The mnemonic moans, groans, and stones describes a condition in which this ion is elevated due to overproduction of parathyroid hormone. Activated vitamin D promotes GI absorption of this ion. For 10 points, name this ion that is stored in bones. That answer is calcium. Tossup 10. This poem describes the hour when lips that would kiss form prayers to broken stone, and says that those stone images receive the supplication of a dead man's hand under the twinkle of a fading star. This poem says, the eyes reappear as the perpetual star, multifoliate star, of death's twilight kingdom. One of this poem's epigraphs references Guy Fawkes and says, a penny for the old guy. And the other epigraph quotes from Heart of Darkness. A nursery rhyme-like section of this poem says, here we go round the prickly pear, and its last section alternates between, for thine is the kingdom, and life is very long. For 10 points, name this poem by T.S. Eliot, whose last lines read, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. That answer is The Hollow Men. Tossup 11. When Orthodox priests do this action for another person, they use the same ICXC position as the one found in the Pantocrator icon. Tertullian wrote that we wear out our foreheads by performing an early variant of this practice, which may have survived as the motion done in the Catholic Mass before the Gospel reading. It's not bowing, but old believers objected to Patriarch Nikon's changes to this practice and performed it the old way as a protest when they were arrested. Most Eastern Christian traditions do this with 2 fingers touching the thumb, moving from right to left, while Western traditions do it from left to right with an open palm. For 10 points, name this ritual blessing in which you trace out the shape of the implement of Christ's execution on your body, sometimes after dipping the hand in holy water. That answer is the sign of the cross. Tossup 12. George Odom showed how to obtain this number using an inscribed equilateral triangle by drawing a chord between the midpoints of 2 of its sides and extending it to meet the circle. When this number is used as a numerical base, every integer terminates, but every fraction is non-terminating. In that base, the digit sequence 1, 1 is avoided because it equals 1, 0, 0. This number can be called the most irrational because each level of its continued fraction has the same largest magnitude of difference. In other words, its continued fraction has only 1s in its denominators. Based on that, this number can be found algebraically by solving the equation x equals 1 over the term 1 plus x. By definition, the square of this number equals 1 plus itself. For 10 points, give this constant the limit of the ratio of consecutive Fibonacci numbers, which names a spiral. That is the golden ratio. Tossup 13. This composer wrote the words actual notes above the following melody of half and quarter note triplets: long B flat, low C sharp, low E, long high E flat, C. A triple piano string chorale slowly shifts between wildly spaced non-dominant diatonic chords to form the static background of a piece by this composer. This composer's 2 contemplations initially paired that piece with one that calls for a grand piano and a player piano, and contrasts eerie strings with ragtime music. In a short piece by this composer, 7 repetitions of an atonal trumpet melody are interspersed with increasingly phonetic woodwind quartet phrases. A long wooden plank is used in his piano sonata that quotes Beethoven's Fifth in all 4 movements, including Hawthorne and the Alcotts. For 10 points, name this composer of The Unanswered Question, Central Park in the Dark, and the Concord Sonata. That is Charles Ives. Tossup 14. Thomas Munson was credited with helping to save this industry in France. John the 22nd erected a castle whose name refers to a product of this industry that developed during the Avignon papacy. Francois Clicquot's widow developed the riddling technique used in part of this industry. Napoleon's Minister of the Interior, Jean-Antoine Chaptal, recommended the use of sugar instead of lead acetate in this industry. This industry was severely damaged by the introduction of the phylloxera insect from the United States, which prompted the grafting of many plants onto resistant rootstock. For 10 points, name this industry that traditionally has centers in Burgundy, Bordeaux, and Champagne. That answer is wine production or winemaking. Tossup 15. A critic from this country identified its greatest narrative poem as Brebeuf and His Brethren by E.G. Pratt. That critic from this country wrote that his early literature is distinguished by the need to build a bulwark against the world and the imagination, which he called a garrison mentality. Another critic wrote that the central character of this nation's literature is the victim, and she outlined 4 victim positions in her book Survival. The Bush Garden is by a critic from this country, Northrop Frye. In a novel from this country, the protagonist sees her friend Moira at a brothel called Jezebel's, and women's ranks are designated by the color of their clothes. The commander plays Scrabble with Offred in that novel from here, The Handmaid's Tale. For 10 points, name this home of Margaret Atwood. That answer is Canada. Tossup 16. In a church in this state in the 1890s, Charles Sheldon preached a sermon that first popularized the question, "What would Jesus do?" Legendarily, John Wesley Hardin shot a man in this state just for snoring. This state was where temperance crusader Carrie Nation first began her violent destruction of saloons. It was the primary destination of exodusters, or African Americans who migrated westward from the South after the Civil War. While mocking populism, a local Emporia Gazette article asked the question, "What's the matter with this state?" in 1896. The northern end of the Chisholm Trail, which brought Texas cattle north, was always in this state. For 10 points, name this state the home of a large stockyard at Abilene. That answer is Kansas. Tossup 17. This phenomenon can cause quartz wind when it occurs in air in an attenuation effect also known as Eckhart streaming. Actuators based on this phenomenon have been proposed for manipulating highly pure compounds without contamination. The SOFAR channel can be used to increase the range of this phenomenon. This phenomenon can be used to efficiently mix non-homogeneous suspensions and accelerate chemical reactions by initiating a type of non-inertial cavitation. The speed of propagation of this phenomenon is given as the square root of the bulk modulus over density by the Newton-Laplace equation, and the Prandtl-Glauert singularity arises due to the assumption of linearity at that speed. This phenomenon is studied in acoustics and is used to detect objects in sonar. For 10 points, name this phenomenon whose speed defines Mach 1. That answer is sound. Tossup 18. In the last act of this play, one of its characters appears clean-shaven and well-dressed for the first time, but can't choke out any coherent words. A character in this play is repeatedly surprised that people know what the fried bread she made is, and serves up cornflakes for breakfast until she runs out. In an interrogation in this play, another character is asked, "Is the number 846 necessary or possible?" and answers both. A character knows that she was the belle of the ball at the title event of this play, which Petey skipped to play chess, but which Goldberg and McCann were glad to attend. For 10 points, name this play in which Meg gives Stanley Weber a drum before the title celebration by Harold Pinter. That is The Birthday Party. Tossup 19. A media studies theory named in part for this response includes the notion that the four uses of media are diversion, personal relationships, personal identity, and surveillance. That theory is named for uses in this reaction. In fMRI studies of the ability to control this reaction by B.J. Casey, images of happy, neutral, and afraid faces were displayed. Casey revealed that the ability to control this emotion is tied to activation of the anterior prefrontal cortex, as opposed to the ventral striatum. A study of this response performed at the Bing Nursery School found that it was significantly correlated to life outcomes. In that study, Ebb Ebsen and Walter Mischel offered a choice between one marshmallow now or two marshmallows later. For 10 points, name this sensation of fulfillment that is delayed by individuals with more self-control. That answer is gratification. Tossup 20. The Castrati Senesino and Gaetano Berenstadt premiered roles by this composer in an opera in which a natural horn opens the aria Va tacito e nascosto. This composer included the aria Sebramate in an opera that puzzled listeners because it included many short ariosos rather than three-part da capo arias. Ptolemaeo's sister Cleopatra plots to depose him and become the sole ruler of Egypt in one of his operas. In one of his operas, the Saracen king Argant falls in love with the captive Almarina, who sings Lascia ch'io pianga, a comically over-earnest Iago aria sung to a plane tree, opens this composer's opera Circe. That aria is Ombra mai fu. Rinaldo and Giolo Cesare were operas by, for 10 points, what German-born Baroque composer of The Harmonious Blacksmith and The Messiah. That answer is Handel. Toss-up 21. The life of a poet from this city is depicted with paper-cut puppets in No Blue Memories. That play is by two other poets from this city, Nate Marshall and Eve Ewing. A poet from this city wondered whether a dream could sing an aria down these rooms, and a poem that ends, "We think of lukewarm water, hope to get in it." Another poet depicted this city with lifted head, singing "So Proud to Be Alive" in a section that begins, "They tell me you are wicked, and I believe them." This city's Bronzeville neighborhood is the setting of Annie Allen by Gwendolyn Brooks. The first poem from a collection about this city describes it as a player with railroads and the nation's freight handler. For 10 points, name this city described as Hog Butcher of the World and City of the Big Shoulders by Carl Sandburg. That answer is Chicago. That is the end of the packet.